Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I have a reel that came in. It's a Shimano Spheros. It's an older version of it, but it's come in for a tune-up. They did strip the line off of it. We have a little bit of salt accumulation there. It's been used as a saltwater reel. So we will clean that spool up. We'll take this apart, make sure that it's lubricated properly, and get it back to its rightful owner. So just a general tune-up. It shouldn't take that long, but I will show you how the reel is made. It's one of these reels that has the worm gear inside for the oscillation, and it's one that's been pretty much a steady performer. So this is the Spheros Aereo, and it's a 3000 size reel, the 3000F. It's a general purpose reel. It can be used in freshwater or saltwater. If you're using it in saltwater, it's an inland reel, either bays, river inlets, or narrow or short surf, but it doesn't have the capacity to go for deep drops. But overall, it's a nice performing reel, one that I've become familiar with, and one that I like as a solid performer. So I'm starting by taking some of the extraneous parts off. I've taken the spool and the drag knob off. Now I'm removing the button on the handle to remove the handle, and then we'll remove the side plate, which I noticed before I started here is missing a screw. So after I'm done with this service, I'll try and find a screw for it, and we'll move on. You'll notice a couple of things. I'm wearing a protective glove to keep the oils and that off of my non-working hand. Also, I'm using a parts basket. I like to put all of my pieces and parts in there so that I find them easily on reinstall. And finally, when I take handles off, I like to put the handle button right back into it so that I don't have to go searching for that. Okay, this has got a case that extends up underneath the rotor. So in order to take the rotor off, we want to first pull the click ratchet. And that usually has a little tension washer on it. And then we're going to go pull a set screw, which holds that rotor screw from becoming loose during operation. And then we'll remove the rotor screw. And I believe that's a 12 millimeter. I'm going to take a look. It is. And this one removes by going counterclockwise, which is traditional. Some spinning reels that you'll find actually have a reverse threaded one. So you just want to be careful as you go to attempt to take that off. So inside here you can see a couple of things going on. Even though it's the reverse is a traditional reverse, in that it's got the dog spring and the tooth ratchet, and we have a ball bearing underneath that's sitting here. So I'm going to just grab this to do the up top service, but before I do, I'm going to pull this side plate off so we can make sure we got that piece lubed as well. All right, to do that, these screws can be worked with either a Phillips head or a flat-bladed screwdriver. I like to use the Phillips head if I have that. It's just more convenient and a better grip. But if you have a flat blade, you can also work it with that. Sometimes if those screws get caked with salt, using that flat blade to start is a better option, just because it seems that the flat bladed screwdrivers are a little bit wider and can grip it a little bit better in that slot. So if you're running into that problem, try that flat bladed screwdriver. All right, so it's missing that screw below, as I mentioned. We're going to have to go find one of them eventually. But right now let's take that case off. And this is what I mean by extends underneath. So this part sits under the rotor, and as it sits under the rotor, you can't simply remove the side plate screws and pull it out. You'll bump the rotor, so that's why you have to come in that way. Okay, we got what's not uncommon, but it's just dirty grease, and we're going to go want to replace that with fresh grease. So I don't have a glove on my working hand, but I do have a paper towel, so I'm going to go grab the paper towel to clean off the main gear here. And this is, I would just say that it's time for the tune-up. There's nothing wrong, it's just that it's accumulated a lot of that contaminants from average fishing. And that could be seawater that that got in here, and as it evaporated, just left some goop in there. But regardless, it's easy enough to clean it up with cotton swabs and paper towels and a general degreaser. That's the bearing. I'm just going to leave the bearing on for now. The bearing can be lubricated. I use a Real X oil for the bearing. And then we're just going to put some fresh reel grease. The reel grease I use is a Penn Precision reel grease. It's a blue grease. A lot of manufacturers use all different kinds of products out there. They're all good, but I would just recommend to you that as you go to service your reel, just use a grease that's meant for fishing reels. Don't use automotive greases or general purpose greases. They'll be effective for a little while, but in the long run, they'll break down or they'll clog up or they'll do some other things. So go ahead and make sure that you keep the reel greases on hand. Okay, this case is pretty clean. The grease was dirty, but the case is clean, so that's not a problem here. And as I mentioned before, this reel has got a worm drive in it as opposed to a traditional oscillating gear or a cross-wind gear. So what we have is we have the pinion gear, we have a bearing underneath, I'll show you that in a moment. We have the shaft that rides up and down, and the worm gear is very similar to a level wind kind of a gear. So as you turn the reel shaft, the pinion gear, as you turn that, you can see it rides up and down. This one's got a light coating of that grease, which is, that's perfectly fine. And I'm just going to put a little bit more of that grease onto the shaft there. And we're pretty clean here, so I'm just going to kind of let this go. It looks like whatever the dirt was, it was confined to that main gear. And again, there's nothing wrong with this reel. I was just asked to tune this one up, so that's what we're doing here. Okay, so I've put the blue grease onto the pinion gear. We've put some grease onto the worm gear. We've greased the back of the main gear. We've oiled the bearing. I oil bearings, grease other moving parts. So I'm just going to simply reinstall that. I'm going to roll this down, get that crosswind block out of the way. And I can reseat that. Just make sure that it turns before I do anything else. And we can actually cover this part up now by taking that side plate. There's a bearing in that side plate. It's a good thing I just turned that over because we got some dirt in there. So let's just go clean that off while we're at it. So this is another of the bearings. So people ask me, what's the right number of bearings in a reel? And I generally say 3 is the minimum. 1 on each case. You saw the one on the other side. This is the one on this case, and 1 up top for the pinion gear is usually plenty. Anything else makes the reel a little bit easier, but it's not necessary to make the reel any better. And as a matter of fact, a lot of folks that are avid fanatics about one particular reel or another always cite things like the Penn Spin Fishers, the older ones, the Daiwa 4000s or 7000s and the like, and those reels in many cases only had 2 or 3 bearings at most. So you don't need 10 bearings to make it, and 3 is the minimum, I would say. 2 is the absolute minimum. 1 on the drive side and 1 up top. You'll find that configuration in like the Penn Silver series and the like, but I like to have the bearing on both sides of that main drive if possible. All right, I'm just putting these 3 back with the mental note that I got to find a screw for the 4th one, but I'm not going to be able to find it as we're doing this video. Okay, then I'm just going to go up top. Again, this is clean, but I do want to show you that bearing up here. So I'm just going to pull the click rotor assembly up. Just lay that down here. And then the bearing sits right on the pinion here. If you wanted to take the bearing out, you would pull these 2 screws on each side of the jacket. We don't need to do that for this exercise. I'm just going to flood that bearing with some oil. And again, we're talking a general tune-up here. We're not talking about a rebuild. If you wanted to do a rebuild, you could pull that bearing out and give it a more thorough cleaning and oil bath, but we don't need to do that. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and reinstall the rotor, and this is why that parts basket works so well. You just have to simply look in the parts basket and find your piece. Now, if you weren't paying attention along the way, if you're doing this for the first time, if you don't know how these things work that well, take pictures. Take your cell phone out, take a digital camera out, take a video camera out like I'm doing here. Take any of those pieces. Take a picture along the way so that you know that the steps that you took to remove these, and then how to put it back if you get stuck on a question. For example, if you didn't know where that screw went that's laying at the end of your bucket when you've thought you put everything back in, you could go back to the reference points of your pictures and say, ah, there it is. I took it out from here because this would happen to be the set screw for the rotor nut. Okay, so I'm just going to work with this. Those of you that watch my videos know I have a little bit of trouble with these small pieces and parts, but we always get them. Just takes a little patience. And you've probably heard me say it before. I've had a friend who told me once when I was doing wheel repair, he said, you need two things to do wheel repair. You need patience and you need a sense of humor. And I found that both have come into play along the way. Okay, that's the set screw that prevents the nut from slipping back during rotation. Now we're going to go ahead and put the click rotor in. That little click rotor tells you that your drag is spinning backwards. So if you had it set and you hear click, 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 you know the spooling line off of it. There's a little click lever here that engages with that rotor, and that's what makes the noise. Okay, now we're just going to put that spool back in. I have another set tension washer here that's inside the spool. I'm going to go grab that and put that on. It's unusual. Usually they sit on top of here without falling down, but in this case I guess it got pulled out. All right, before I do that, let's go ahead and do two other things since this is a general tune-up. Let's just grab a piece of steel wool, and I use a metal cleaner. I use a chrome polish from an automotive. Seems to have just the right amount of grit to it, just a little bit on some steel wool. That generally takes the salt buildup and that off of the spool, and I like to at least get my customers back a nice clean spool when they do it. It shows that it's been serviced. The other one, if it's just light tarnish or shellacking or something like that, I happen to use a product called Purple Magic, also available in automotive stores, but it's also available in Walmart and some other places, and that tends to shine it up. This is the product I'm referring to. It's a Purple Power, and just a squirt or two, and it's a general degreaser. You don't need to flood it, as you can see, and it does polish up and take all of the things like fish scales and the like off of the reel as well. While I have the spool here, one last thing we'll do is we'll go in and we will make sure that the drag washers are clean. In order to do that, there's 4 screws that hold down the cap to this. So we're going to go ahead and pull those 4 screws. These also are Phillips head screws. And this is an attempt by Shimano to keep as much water as possible off of the drag washers. On top drag reels, this is the #1 place where water infiltrates the reel. It brings, if you're doing saltwater fishing in particular, it brings all the contaminants in there. It cakes onto the reels, onto the drags, and when it cakes on, it causes them to become less efficient. So I just pulled the 4 screws out and put them in my parts bucket. I'm going to use a little pin now just to pull the cap washer off, and then we can just pull the washers out here just to make sure that they're in good stead. These are felt washers, so they get oiled. I do notice there's a buildup of some grease in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and just take my Q-tip and work that out. And we're seeing a little bit of the same thing that we saw below, just some accumulated dirt. So it's a good idea with that shield up top, but it doesn't keep everything out. Okay, felt washers get oiled. So I just go back to my reel oil, and we'll just give it a nice soaking there. And what the idea on the maintenance on the drags is you want to keep these washers flexible, and that's the whole idea behind the felt. So here's a relatively expensive reel in terms of, you know, the marketplace for a spinning reel, and it's using felt washers. Some people sometimes think, okay, felt washers is an economical way. No, it's not. It's a technology that's been proven, and it's pretty much just as good. Now, if you're tearing these up, and this happens with Penn Fierce reels and some of the others, if you happen to be tearing these washers up, that you do a lot of drag fishing and it's putting a stress on them, then you can go ahead and replace these things. You can upgrade them to Carbon Tex type of washers. They're available as aftermarket products, and if you want, you can go ahead and add those while you're doing your servicing. But in this case, those washers are fine. There's no indication of wear. So whatever type of fishing these folks are doing with this reel, it's just it's appropriate, and you don't need to go ahead and do any washer replacement with these. Okay, once you do that, then you put the 4 screws back in. So we're almost at the end of this. But the Spheros, it's a nice reel. This is an older version. I'll say this one's probably, I don't know, 5 years old maybe. But it's still going to last a long time. It's got, as I said, it's got a proven technology there. That worm gear is a little bit different than some of the oscillating gear type structures you see in reels. That's why I thought it would be appropriate to go take this one apart and show it to you, as well as fix it for my customer. And I know that a lot of folks watch this just to see the general technologies in the reels. Or sometimes they're thinking about buying a reel and they want to know what makes the reel work before they invest in it. You know, sometimes reels are pricey, but not necessarily good technology. They're just working off the company name. And sometimes the reels appear to be economical, and yet you open up underneath and the technology is wonderful. And you wonder how come they're selling it for the price they're selling it for when the competition might be more significant. An example of that would be a Jarvis Walker reel. Jarvis Walker at one point was a Penn company. Since been sold off a couple of times. I think they're now part of Bimini Bay, I think is where they wound up. But regardless, that had a beautiful technology in it. It was a little bit older technology, but the reels were pretty much bulletproof. And yet they were economical when they were released, and they're still good performers today. Okay, last thing, just the handle then. And of course I got to go find a side plate, not after the video's done. So handle's interchangeable, right and left, but my customer brought it in as right, so it's going out as right. If I didn't remember that, I could have gone back to the video here and seen that it came in as a left-handed reel, because you certainly want to put it back the same way that you got it. And this one's been cleaned, it's been oiled, it's been prepped. You got a little bit of a view of the technology behind the reel, and now you're going to see that it's going to pay off. It's just a nice, smooth operator. It's a beautiful reel. I guess we could put a little dab of oil on the bail assembly here, just to make sure that operates smoothly. Trip that and make sure it works fine, which it does. And going to go for years to come. Nice reel. Easy to maintain, and worthwhile to get this thing serviced on a regular basis. What's regular? About a year or so after each season. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And with that, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, wishing you good fishing. Thank you.